Hi, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence. And I'm really excited to have another guest on the show here today. I've got Tiphaine Le Roux joining us. Hi, Tiff. Thanks very much for being here today.
Hello, everyone. Very keen to be here. Thank you so much, Victoria, for inviting me. I'm very looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I think we met through LinkedIn, and I always find that I have amazing connections through that. And I loved our conversation that we had. So I absolutely had to have you on the show. And I know you've got lots of great insights to share with the listeners all about culture, global expansion, and around communication. But one of the places I would love to start is that when I looked again on your LinkedIn profile, I noticed that you talked about how important connection is to you. And I think you know as well how important connection is to me as well. So
Absolutely.
connection is a funny word, though. It means different things to different people. So I'd just love to start there. What does it mean to you, and why does it matter to you?
It's a great question. Actually, this came from, I remember a workshop that I did 6 years ago with I remember a guy, and he was so great. His title was Chief Poetic Officer, and he had like
Wow.
so many things to say about like communication, as you mentioned, the importance, how you present yourself, what it means to you, like what kind of energy you bring out there to the world. And one of the questions that he asked us during that workshop was, all right, if you had to define yourself with one word, one adjective, what would it be? And after a few minutes, I would say couple minutes of reflection, and I thought about this word connection, because to me it's really important. Connection for me means many things. It means how you are energy-wise, really like connecting with each other in the sense that how do you understand the other one, how they understand you, how do you project your messaging across, how do you get the story in the sense that perhaps after in the way you are going to talk about some things, either that being tough conversation, etc. You do it in a way that you are aware of who they are as a person. And to me, it's so important to be able to get to know the person behind the individual. It's not just a conversation between who you are and who I am. I mean, as professional, it's also, okay, what brings you joy? It's also like what makes you tick. And this is something that as a manager in my day-to-day job, like it's very important, because I really try to understand who are the people that I'm managing in my team, so that I can know how to bring up some tough conversation. I know how to highlight their wins, for instance, etc. So there are many ways, but yeah, it's really how you get the individual behind the person that's in front of you.
I love that. And I loved how actually you started with this idea of energy, because that's something I also believe in, is this
Mm,
idea of choosing the energy of how you connect with others.
absolutely.
But I was really curious as well by what you said at the end there. So getting to know the person behind the professional, maybe facade that you see. So I'm quite interested in this. You are the leader of a team, a very
Mm,
global team.
mm.
How do you get to know people better? Because I think this is also a big challenge for a lot of people who listen to this show. You're leading or managing people in lots of different locations. You very rarely get the chance to meet up, if at all. So how do you do that? How do you get to know people when you don't have that opportunity to even just have a coffee together, or do something more fun together?
It's a great question. I would say I'm thinking of two aspects. The first one, I would say it's more in the context in which if you are newly manager of a team, let's say you're actually getting in a new job there, so it's a totally new team that know each other but that don't know you. In that context, I would say one of the great tips that I learned a few years ago, actually, that I applied is before getting that one-on-one times in which you will ask your direct report, well, to get you the typical information on the day-to-days, really refrain from that, and just for 1 month, try to get to know each person of your team. Obviously, if it's not physically speaking, you can always take a half an hour coffee chat and get to know the person. At the very beginning, it makes a whole difference afterwards in the way you're gonna do like your one-on-ones, really like knowing about like who they are, as we mentioned after, as a person, what they do, why they're here, basically, because they, you know, we all have personal, I would say, objectives. Sure, the company has their target, etc., but we are all here for personal reasons as well. And I think it's very important to know them, basically, and also trying to understand a bit about the background. So getting that one-on-one time, very informal, at least once with every person before you start asking there for like reporting activities, was really helpful for me in the job. And I would encourage anyone taking on a new role as a manager to do the same. And second, I would say, if you're like very busy and have a schedule like a minister and you can't do anything else, I would say then during your one-on-one times that you're going to have that are quite formal, take that extra 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning, really to just have an informal chat, a very genuine one, right? Like not just about, oh, how are you doing? The weather today, and then move forward, but really trying to have insightful questions so that you get to know the individual. It will make the difference. For sure.
That's a really interesting point, because I think the real temptation is to, in particularly in virtual meetings, it's just to jump straight in, like to go straight into,
100%.
okay, we've got all this to talk about. Whereas I think it's more natural when you're in person to have that bit more chit chat time. So that's great advice. I love that idea of, you know, very mindfully and intentionally carving out the time. How do you show up as a manager then, and a leader? So how do people get to know who you are, and what are the ways that you think about that?
I think actually it's a tough question, because it comes to vulnerability, and I think it's not so easy, because there are some aspects I think that you're tempted to share and some other not to. And what I'm doing, and I didn't used to do that, so that's quite new from like a year and a half ago, actually, like 3 years ago on my first managing job, like I was 4 years ago now, didn't do that, you know. I did like all the mistake, like go straight into like business things and didn't get to know the person, and didn't share anything really about me. I'm trying to do the same, actually. So when I did that one-on-one time at the beginning, it wasn't so much just about me asking the question. I also shared, I would say, aspects about my life, about the reason why I'm here, and why I believe the team can be great, etc., and why it's aligned to my personal also objectives within the company. That's one aspect that I do. And other than that, I try. It's not always easy to have, I would say, like equal time with like everyone, but you always get to have times like going to events, for instance, right? So you're going to go to events. I'm talking about a sales context, because obviously I'm managing a sales team. So if we're going to events, we're going to go there with 2 or 3 individuals on my team, for instance, and they're always going to be a little bit more relaxed time in between the trade show, just because, for instance, the way to actually go there. So it's time, you know, to get to know each other in a more informal background, or also have like monthly coffee chats as well, you know, to have like that one-on-one times. I think it's very precious, and it's important to share some aspects about why you're here, some aspects about your personal life as well, so that they can relate to you as an individual. Although sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, because you might think, wait, should I actually like talk about really everything about me? No, probably not. But there are some aspects I think that it's important, so that they can also relate to you as a human being.
And I think that's also really interesting, because you started off talking about vulnerability, and of course we have to all decide how much we share about ourselves. But my understanding, and the observations I have in terms of the people I work with, is the more you share about yourself, the more it invites sharing from other people, right?
Absolutely.
So people respond to that. They open up when you open up, and they feel safe to do so when they see you doing it. So I think that's a really, you know, really, really great strategy. So, you know, I can see that that's really powerful. And it sounds like you also have some in-person time with your team. Your team is based across, is it Europe and then US? Is that right? Just across these regions?
Exactly. Yeah, there are like, it's about 10 individuals that are scattered a little bit between Europe and the US.
Excellent. And how do you sort of ensure, the team spirit? Because that's the other sort of challenge that comes up. And, people working across, again, virtually majority of the time, working across different regions, different time zones, even, this can be challenging in itself. So how do you bring the team together and make them feel like part of one team?
That's a great question. And yes, it does bring a lot of challenges, especially because if yourself, you're, let's say, part of the headquarter where mostly you are based, then obviously, physically speaking, you're going to see more some part of your team instead of the other. And the challenge is, how do you make sure that everyone feels included, I would say, and really feels part of the team? There are different aspects to consider here. I would say the first one is that, well, because we are a sales organization, it's having common objectives for the team. I think it's important, even because I have like different regions to manage. They have different growth maturity. Even though they have like very specific challenges, I think it's important to know, okay, as a team, sales team, like global sales team, this is our objective. So that at the end of the day, no matter like if one region actually contributes more than the others, we are all in the same boat. This is the objective we have to reach. I would say this is the first thing. Second is more around having team gathering times. This could be both physically speaking, to have an as a team, like we try to gather everyone at least like twice a year, I would say, because, when you bring people like from the US, it's a little bit harder. But yeah, we try to see each other like all twice a year, where we have both informal time to connect, but also after workshops, etc., in between everyone. Those team gathering can happen also online. We try to do that regularly with, for instance, time for training, right, where it can be for absolutely everyone, basically. So that's which we were trying to do that maybe once a month, and try to change the speaker if we can, so that they can bring ideas to the table as well, and maybe share about a use case they've seen as well, so that people can learn from it. We try to do that regularly, and we see that also this brings people together. As they get onboarded, each of them as well, we have a buddy system, in which we try to do it like cross country, so that even if it's someone in Germany actually getting onboarded, we try to get them paired with someone in France, for instance, so that they can learn from each other, so that they can also get connected in some other ways, because they're going to ask for help, is going to ask for, oh, how does this work, etc. So this also helps them feel included within, I would say, the whole company itself. Something that also might sound basic, but as much as possible to keep all communication in English, written communication once, because the company is French created, and I would say maybe 70% of the company are like French speakers, not necessarily French born, but French speakers. It's tempted at times, right, to have French conversation, even though, there's someone that doesn't speak French. So we try as much as possible to have all conversation within the Teams, or the Slack, I would say, in English, so that people do not feel excluded. And it does matter. Honestly, I know it does matter. And the hardest is to keep it working. And for that, you have to be, as the manager, it's also one of your responsibility to make sure that if someone speaks French, please, can you actually make sure you do that in English, because it helps the team feels included, for sure. So those are, the type of, I would say, tips I would recommend to get the team together.
I love the buddy idea, actually. I love that, because I think actually that is the hardest thing about working virtually from home. Just getting onboarded is so much tougher these days than it ever has been. You can't just turn around to somebody and say, hey, like, where was this thing again? Or where, like, how do I find this information? So I love that idea. And that can also build some really strong bonds across the team. Your idea about inclusive communication, I'm very passionate about making sure that, there is inclusive communication for all. But I'm really conscious that sometimes English dominates in this way. And I find that quite interesting, because what you're saying is actually 70%, the majority speak French. But this was an active choice that English should be the language. Because of why? I'm curious, because I think that's quite an interesting kind of choice.
It's I would say when the company has been around for 8 years now. At the very beginning, because it was just a few dozens of people, it was the majority of French people. They started in French, but then quite quickly, the founder, she wanted to really create a global organization. And then she said, English has to be the root of everything. And very early on, I think maybe after just a year after the inception, all communication, all material turned to be in English in preparation of that. And then as we started to onboard people from different countries, from different cultural backgrounds, it was really helpful. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's hard to keep everything in French because when you everything in English, because when you have so many French speakers, the tendency is that people go back to speaking French at times, but at least on every important channel, etc., we really try to force ourselves to be in English.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, particularly in the context of global expansion.
Yeah.
I'd love to go back to something you mentioned right earlier on, which was about tough conversations. As with every business, every team at times has to have tough conversations, whether it's between individuals and giving feedback about something that's not working, between, from the line manager to the employees, or from the team members to the line manager. How do you handle that, particularly in a sort of very global team, very diverse team? How do you make that work?
It's one of the areas that as managers, I would say we don't like so much, especially because you want everyone to succeed, you want your team to succeed, and you want people as individual also to just grow and be happy. But sometimes there are just some decisions that needs to be had. There are some directions that we need to follow as well, in which the business wants to go. And yes, there are some tough conversations that need to be had. And in that perspective, I would say, if I bring that back to a more like a sales context, because this is what we're having, what I've learned across the year is that to be able to have that conversation, there are different pieces. The first, again, because we were talking about salespeople, we have to talk about KPIs first. Okay, what are the indicators that are showing that we are on track, and what does it mean actually if we're going off track? It's that kind of conversation that very, very early on those 101 time that we have formal ones, we need to agree on, so that everyone has, I would say, the roadmap very clear in mind. That's the first thing. The second is for me to provide warnings, really warnings like early on. We know, because we have KPIs and because these are like sales efforts, it's either you manage to sell or you don't, or, I mean, it's I would say almost like black or white situations. Therefore, we can see very early on that things are going off track. And when we know that they're going off track enough so that there's going to be consequences, as of maybe we need to close the country because then, we need to focus on another one, or maybe this person wasn't I would say performing well enough according to the company standard. The most important thing is to give warnings ahead of time so that they know what's going on, and it doesn't happen just one day, they don't expect it, and then, by the way, this is not right, so we need to stop. So provide warnings is very important. Then second, I would say to be upfront about it. A third, sorry, being upfront about it. I don't think, obviously it's going to depend after on the cultural background, as we mentioned, right? Because depending on the culture, etc. So the way you're going to have to be upfront might differ to another, but still, I think people need to have visibility because they need to be able to think about afterwards and to, probably like search for like their another job or whatsoever. Being upfront for me, and last but not least, it's to be supportive until the end. I think as managers, we are tempted to think that once we've decided that for some reason, like this person can't be here anymore for XYZ reason, to just maybe spend less time, or to maybe, like don't consider them as much anymore because we're like, oh, there's 100 things to do, so maybe I should focus on what's going on there. But I think it's important that as we try to get to that great experience on the onboarding, that of the offboarding, it's also important. So being supportive, keep having those one-on-ones, because there's still some handover to be done anyway, making sure that the individual knows that we are here and we're here until the end is very important.
Excellent. So really kind of clear there. So KPIs, obviously very important, particularly in a sales context, sales team context. Giving the warnings if things are moving off track, and people being very clear if performance is not being held up. You talked about being upfront and being able to have those kind of conversations, direct conversations, and then being supportive until the end, which I think, again, so important, right? You know, sometimes, I mean, particularly in busy environments and busy teams, the attention can drift very, very quickly, right? Particularly if it's not the priority in the sense of what's working. Fantastic. So that's really, really helpful. And that's really helpful tips, particularly on the tough conversation front. But coming back to you a minute, you know, I'm very aware that, you know, global leadership, global management is really important to you. I know you've worked in this area for a long time. You've also got the podcast that you have set up, International Corner, where you're
Absolutely
different people. Why does it matter so much to you, the global piece? I'm really curious about what originally kind of made this interesting for you.
I think it comes back to two things. Actually, the first one is the connection bits, because I feel so enriched, I would say, by the conversations I can have with people from different backgrounds. They all bring different perspectives, different ideas, and to me it's really rich, and I really get inspired by people who think differently. So I would say, like, this is the very first aspect for me that was important. And the second, I would say, is it just comes back to my love of being in a foreign country. When I when I started to go to business school, like the very first reason I got there, this this was like maybe about like 18 years ago now. This was because I just wanted to go abroad, and that's what I managed to do. I went to the US, I went to South America, I went to the UK, and it just was so fantastic. So then I just thought, how can I bring the two together, right? My love for connecting with people, and also my love for just being abroad, discovering new culture, discovering new countries. And this is how it's all started, basically. And when I started my career in sales, I also quickly thought that there was a possibility for me to combine everything at the same time. And this is how this ended up.
Amazing. So it's been very much part of your DNA throughout the whole journey.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there are times when it's challenging. Of course it is, because, you know, not everything is easy. As much as we can learn and have great experiences, there are times when it's tough up for us personally, or there are issues. So I'm quite curious. I don't know if there's ever been a time which you feel comfortable to share, where you've had an experience where living in or working with a different culture was challenging for you, and how did you, you know, manage yourself through that?
Yes, absolutely. I would say this was about 5 years ago. I was working for another French company, a scale-up, who wanted to launch the US market. Therefore, they decided to send me, because I actually joined the company for that job. I got lucky enough to be selected for that. And I would say, because this was my first expansion job, really, in being in the country outside of Europe, we had some kind of preconceived ideas about how to go about. But when I was on the ground, I actually realized that everything we thought about, it was it was irrelevant. Like, really, it was so irrelevant. And for the very first time, because it wasn't my first time going to the US, I went there prior to that, 3 years before. But then it was the first time going in there in the professional context on my own, I would say. And I really felt alone at the beginning, because I was like, okay, so I have the whole team there that's I have no idea how to do that. I have some objectives that I have no idea how to do that. So I had, during that first 2 months, I would say I had that feeling, okay, am I actually going to make it? Am I going to succeed that mission? And somehow, in that context, this is when I managed to actually talk to one of my mentors. And then that's, like she gave me like that great piece of advice saying, at some point you can't control everything. You don't know what you don't know. So the best that you can do is just to get the experience from any other people. And then this is how I started basically to just have coffees, right? Like with any startup CEOs that wanted to make it there in the US, to understand how they did it, basically how they started, how they got their first clients. And I did that maybe during like 2 to 3 weeks. I had like 3 coffees or virtual coffees, like absolutely every day, to get as much feedback as I could. And from then I started to have ideas and then started to build on that. And then I got more confident, and we eventually managed to sign the first 5, 6 clients, etc., and to open the branch. So I was really happy about that. But yeah, the very first 2 months it was very tough when you think and then you realize you don't know anything. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to have that vulnerability, and also I think there's just moment of saying, okay, maybe I don't know anything, and that's fine, right? So let's just start from scratch and learn from the locals.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think, very openly sharing that, I think this is a very common experience that people have, that they are experienced, they are good at what they do, they know what they can deliver, and then they change context, and culturally it's so different. Actually, what has worked before does not work anymore. Actually, you have to think about things differently. And you were telling that story, and I was thinking, wow, there's some very powerful learnings there, which, if you don't mind me summarizing, like me picking out, like I think you sought out a mentor to get some perspective and insight, some cultural thoughts, but also some perspective on what you could do about it. So you got that support. I heard you talking about researching, so really putting yourself out there, almost like as saying, okay, I'm going to do my research and understand what's different here. Like, how can I do this through the interview process? And, then just having a go, experimenting, and realizing that you were going to have to try things differently, that you were going to have to be creative in the way that you were doing things. And it obviously led to success, which is brilliant. So I think those learnings are fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tiff. I mean, was there anything else, from that situation or from other times where you've been in sort of diverse cultural situations, either living abroad or working abroad, which you have some really good insights or learnings about what works that you can share with the listeners?
I think that what I did back there, that's something you can apply absolutely in any kind of situations, because honestly, if you don't know, and what I realized there is that people are just so happy to help, honestly. If you just present yourself at, hey, trying to make it here, launching the US shops for like a French company, don't know anything. Can you spare maybe 15-30 minutes to have a chat? And honestly, you'd be surprised of how many people say yes, because they're like very I think people just like to share, like what they've learned, and they want to be helpful. And at least from the startup community, this is what I've realized in the US, but also in other countries, that they're very happy to help. So that's one thing. Second, I think it's to look for advices that can be free online. They're like podcasts, there are resources that are free, and actually funny stories that's thanks to that job of opening shops in the US that I started my podcast International Corner, because speaking to other people, to other companies, I just realized, oh my God, like we're just making all the same mistakes at the beginning. We could save so much time by just sharing the learnings of everyone to the community. And that's how I started this podcast. But yeah, like you have free resources online as well. That's very important. And I would say also like another thing that I've seen that goes back a little bit to the cultural aspect that are discussed a lot in your podcast, is that before going into a meeting, especially an important one, it's good to know how you should behave, because you only get one shot at first impression. And especially if it's a very important deal that's in the making, you don't want to miss the opportunity just because you didn't, research enough, or just you're not aware of what are the cultural aspects that you need to consider if you want to do business there. So definitely do your research, ask people like that. Those are like the common aspect that I can see in any kind of situation I was when I was abroad.
Amazing. I love those learnings. And actually, I think there's something in this about recognizing it's okay to ask for help. Actually, there's nothing wrong with that, no matter how experienced you are, kind of going, actually, there's more here that I can learn.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. I think people always like to be asked for their advice. And like people are really willing to do that. Like, they will respond to that. So I think it's a really great strategy. And I think your point about cultural aspect also super, super helpful. So let's say people who are listening either are earlier on in their career, maybe they are wanting to get more into a global role, or perhaps they are already, but want to continue building up a very global career. Do you have any kind of advice about what is the best way to develop your career globally? Like how to really make sure that you get working across multiple cultures, that you can really get this experience?
I think, yeah, I have a few ones because this is how I also managed to get into that environment in the first place. I think there's a piece of self-reflection first about what's about your experience and what you've done across the past few years that can be linked to being a global leader. There is always something. The very first job that I got, I linked it back to my studies and how I went abroad for X, Y, and Z situation, what I learned. So I think there's this part where we have to think about what's relevant about our experience that can be interesting for the company who can hire us as a global leader. That's the first thing. Second, I would say if we're talking about a move that's more internal, maybe you're more into working with one market, and there are some openings for global positions. It's to really work on those relationships with your stakeholders, especially the ones that are going to have a voice into the matter. It has to be in a genuine way, right? And this is where I think it gets complicated, because it doesn't have to feel like this is something calculated. And I think we come back to that connection piece. So to me, it's really, as you think about your global planning, and this usually takes time, right? Like it can't happen just overnight. It's like, okay, what are the stakeholders that I need to get to know? And it should just start like that, I think, because eventually, as I mentioned, there's a need within people, within each of us, to want to help others. And you just want to make sure that at some point, if they want to help you, if they want to help someone, it's going to be you. And you can only have that if you build genuine connection. And this can only happen over time and over conversations, that you can have here and there. So I would say that if you're looking to move into that new role, this has to be carefully planned, but also allow some time, because to build those connections, it takes some time. You can't cheat on that. It's impossible.
I love that. And I think this is a fantastic place for us to pause. We started with connection, we finished with connection. And I think those are amazing tips and ideas that you have shared there for people who really are serious about developing their global career. Tiff, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I feel like I've learned quite a lot about how you are managing global teams, the kind of things that you see are working in the context today, how it can work virtually as well as in person, and how to deal with some of the difficult situations like tough conversations. If people want to find out more about the podcast, about you and what you're up to and what you're doing, what's the best way for people to kind of connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, Tiphaine Le Roux. Do not hesitate. I'll always be happy to have a chat.
Excellent. And we'll put your link in the show notes as well, the podcast, because I love your podcast as well. And yeah, really encourage people to go and have a listen of that. But Tiff, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been absolutely brilliant to have your insights, your expertise, and I know the listeners will appreciate it too.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for such a great conversation. Have a good one, everyone.
Take care. Bye.